I built Nexus Industries from nothing. For 23 years, I poured my blood, sweat, and dreams into every contract, every client meeting, and every sleepless night. My name is Ezra Trent, and at 48, I thought I had earned my place as the rightful heir to my father's empire. But as I sat in that mahogany-paneled conference room, watching the family lawyers shuffle through papers, my stomach churned. The air felt thick with expectation and dread. My younger sister Lauren sat across from me, her perfectly manicured fingers drumming against the table. She wore that smug smile I had grown to despise over the years. Dad's funeral had been just 3 days ago, and already the vultures were circling. The lawyer cleared his throat and began reading the will. Everything seemed normal until he reached the business succession clause. My heart stopped. To my daughter Lauren Trent, I leave full ownership and control of Nexus Industries. The words hit me like a freight train. 23 years of loyalty, sacrifice, and building this company meant nothing. Lauren's reaction was immediate and telling. She didn't gasp in surprise or show any shock. Instead, she simply nodded as if this moment had been planned all along. The realization hit me hard. She had known. Somehow, she had convinced our dying father to change his will behind my back. I sat there, frozen, as the lawyer continued reading about minor bequests and property divisions. My hands trembled with rage and disbelief. After the meeting ended, Lauren approached me with that fake sympathetic look she had perfected over the years. "Ezra, I know this is hard for you," she said, placing her hand on my shoulder. I shrugged it off violently. "But I think it's time for fresh leadership." Dad agreed. The casual way she delivered that blow made my blood boil. Fresh leadership? I had been leading this company while she was still figuring out her college major. "We'll talk tomorrow," she continued, already assuming the role of my boss. "There are going to be some changes around here." The warning in her voice was unmistakable. The next morning, Lauren called an emergency board meeting. I arrived early, hoping to speak with some of the board members privately, but they all seemed to be avoiding eye contact. Something was definitely wrong. When Lauren entered the boardroom, she carried herself with a confidence I had never seen before. She took the seat at the head of the table, my seat, and spread out a folder full of documents. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice," she began, her voice steady and authoritative. "As the new CEO of Nexus Industries, I want to address some immediate organizational changes." My jaw clenched as she outlined her vision for the company. But the real blow came when she announced that I would be stripped of all board voting rights and relegated to a purely advisory role. "My brother has done wonderful work over the years," she said with mock appreciation, "but his methods are outdated. We need to move into the 21st century." The board members nodded along like sheep. I felt humiliated, diminished, and completely powerless. That evening, I locked myself in my office and let the rage consume me. The walls seemed to close in as I replayed every moment of that devastating day. 23 years of building this company, and now I was being treated like some relic from the past. I stared at the awards on my walls, the photos of successful projects, the certificates of achievement, all meaningless now. Lauren thought she could erase me, push me aside like some outdated piece of equipment. She had no idea who she was dealing with. I had built this company from the ground up, knew every client relationship, every supplier agreement, every financial detail. If she wanted a war, she would get one. But I wouldn't fight her openly. That would be too easy for her to counter. No, I would be smart about this. I would use everything I knew about business, about this company, and about her weaknesses against her. She had just made the biggest mistake of her life. I pulled out a notepad and began writing down everything I knew about Nexus Industries that she didn't. The next few weeks, I became a shadow in my own company. I quietly began auditing every department, every contract, every financial record I could access. What I discovered was both shocking and perfect for my plans. Lauren had been too eager to take control and hadn't bothered to really understand the company's financial situation. There were hidden debts that Dad had been managing carefully, supplier relationships that were hanging by threads, and several major contracts that were about to expire. She was walking into a minefield without even knowing it. I documented everything meticulously, creating a detailed report of the company's actual financial health versus what appeared on the surface. The more I dug, the more ammunition I gathered. There were also several questionable decisions she had already made in her first month as CEO. decisions that were costing the company money and credibility. I made copies of every important document and stored them securely. Lauren might have thought she had won, but she had no idea that the game was just beginning. Knowledge was power, and I was gathering an arsenal. I started reaching out to old contacts and investors who had worked with me over the years. These were people who knew my track record, who had made money because of my decisions and leadership. I was careful not to directly criticize Lauren at first. Instead, I simply asked how they felt about the leadership change and listened to their concerns. The feedback was exactly what I had hoped for. Many of them were worried about the company's direction under inexperienced leadership. Some had already had awkward interactions with Lauren where her lack of industry knowledge became obvious. "She just doesn't understand the market like you do, Ezra," one major investor told me over lunch. "I'm concerned about my investment." I planted seeds of doubt carefully, never directly attacking Lauren, but always raising thoughtful questions about the company's future. These conversations gave me hope and confirmed what I already knew. Lauren might have the title, but she didn't have the respect of the people who mattered most. I began building a network of allies who were quietly rooting for change. The foundation for her downfall was being laid one conversation at a time. Lauren's first major public relations move was announcing a massive expansion plan. The press release painted a picture of unprecedented growth and innovation under her leadership. She scheduled interviews and photo shoots, positioning herself as the visionary leader who would take Nexus Industries to new heights. But I knew the numbers behind her ambitious claims, and they didn't add up. Using my network of industry contacts and friendly journalists, I began leaking contradictory information. I provided financial analysts with the real debt figures, showed them the supplier contracts that were in jeopardy, and explained why her expansion timeline was impossible given the company's actual resources. The questions started coming immediately. Business reporters began digging deeper, asking harder questions about the company's financial stability and Lauren's qualifications. Within a week, what should have been positive coverage turned skeptical. Financial news outlets started running pieces questioning whether Nexus Industries was overextending itself. Lauren tried to control the narrative, but the damage was done. Her credibility took its first major hit, and she had no idea I was behind it. One of our key suppliers, Morrison Steel, had been working with us for over 15 years. I had personally negotiated most of their contracts and maintained a strong relationship with their CEO. When Lauren took over, she immediately tried to renegotiate terms to get better prices, but she approached it all wrong. She was aggressive and dismissive, treating them like they should be grateful for our business. I knew this wouldn't work with Morrison Steel. They valued partnership and respect above everything else. As I expected, they were offended by Lauren's approach. So when their CEO called me privately to complain, I listened sympathetically and suggested he might want to explore other options. "You know, there are other companies who would appreciate what you bring to the table," I told him. Within 2 weeks, Morrison Steel quietly ended their exclusive contract with us and signed with one of our competitors. This created immediate supply chain problems for Lauren's expansion plans. She had to scramble to find replacement suppliers at much higher costs, which completely destroyed the profit margins she had promised the board. It was a small victory, but it sent a clear message. She didn't understand the relationships that kept this company running. The next board meeting was my chance to start asking the right questions publicly. I came prepared with detailed financial projections and supplier reports. When Lauren presented her quarterly update, I raised my hand with what appeared to be innocent curiosity. "Lauren, these expansion numbers look impressive, but I'm wondering how we're managing the increased costs from our supplier changes?" The question caught her off guard. She stumbled through an explanation that clearly showed she hadn't fully calculated the impact. I followed up with more questions about cash flow, debt service, and market projections. Each question exposed another gap in her planning. The board members started looking uncomfortable as they realized Lauren didn't have solid answers. "These are complex operational details," she finally said, clearly frustrated. "I'm focused on the big picture strategy. But business is all about the details, and everyone in that room knew it." I could see doubt creeping into the board members' faces. After the meeting, several of them approached me privately to discuss their concerns. Lauren might have the title, but I was starting to reclaim the respect. If you're enjoying this wild ride of corporate revenge, make sure to subscribe and hit that like button. Trust me, You won't want to miss what happens next when Lauren discovers who's really pulling the strings. That's when I got the call that would change everything. Harrison Vale, CEO of our biggest competitor, Pinnacle Corp, reached out directly. We had been rivals for years, but there was always mutual respect between us. Ezra, he said during our private meeting at an exclusive downtown restaurant. I've been watching the situation at Nexus with interest. Lauren's inexperience is showing, and frankly, it's creating opportunities in the market. He leaned forward, lowering his voice. I have a proposition. What if we work together? You know Nexus inside and out, and I have the resources to capitalize on their mistakes. The partnership he proposed was brilliant. I would provide intelligence about Nexus's vulnerabilities while Pinnacle positioned itself to steal our major clients. In return, Harrison promised me a senior executive position and equity stake in his company. It was a chance to rebuild my career while watching Lauren's empire crumble. Think about it, Harrison said as we shook hands. Sometimes the best revenge is building something even better. The offer was tempting, but I wasn't ready to abandon ship just yet. I had more cards to play. I decided to play the perfect supportive brother role. In public and in front of the board, I became Lauren's biggest cheerleader. I praised her vision, supported her initiatives, and acted like the loyal older brother who was thrilled to see his little sister succeed. This confused her at first. She had expected me to fight her openly, and my sudden cooperation made her suspicious. But over time, she began to trust it, thinking she had finally broken my spirit and won my respect. This false sense of security was exactly what I needed. During board meetings, I would enthusiastically endorse her proposals while subtly asking questions that planted seeds of doubt. I love this expansion plan, Lauren. Have you considered how we'll handle the working capital requirements during the first quarter? My tone was supportive, but the questions forced her to reveal gaps in her planning. Behind the scenes, I continued gathering intelligence and building my network of dissatisfied employees and worried investors. The beauty of this approach was that Lauren never saw me as a threat. She thought she had won, which made her careless and overconfident. She had no idea that every smile and word of encouragement was part of a carefully orchestrated plan. The talent drain started slowly, then accelerated rapidly. It began with Jessica Wright, our head of client relations, who had worked with me for 8 years. She came to my office one afternoon, clearly frustrated. Ezra, Lauren doesn't listen to anyone. She's making decisions about client management without understanding our relationships. Within 2 weeks, Jessica had accepted a position at Pinnacle Corp, a move I had quietly facilitated through my conversations with Harrison. Then it was Marcus Kim from engineering, followed by Patricia Cruz from finance. These were all people I had hired and mentored over the years. They trusted my judgment and were concerned about the company's direction under Lauren's leadership. I never directly recruited them to leave, but when they expressed frustration, I happened to know about opportunities elsewhere. Each departure created operational problems for Lauren and sent a message to the remaining staff about confidence in her leadership. Each purchase was small enough to avoid triggering disclosure requirements, but collectively, I was building a significant position. My investment advisor helped me structure the purchases to stay under regulatory radar while maximizing my eventual voting power. The beautiful irony was that Lauren's own mistakes, the supplier problems, the talent exodus, the questioned expansion plans, were keeping the stock price low and making my acquisitions more affordable. She had no idea that while she thought she controlled the company completely, I was systematically buying back influence. It would take time, but eventually, I would have enough voting power to force changes. The student was about to become the teacher. Lauren finally realized that something was wrong, but she focused on the wrong enemy. Instead of examining her own leadership failures, she decided that I was sabotaging her behind the scenes. She hired a public relations firm and started a subtle media campaign designed to discredit me. Articles began appearing in business publications questioning my past decisions and suggesting that I was a bitter, outdated executive who couldn't accept modern leadership. The stories painted Lauren as a forward-thinking innovator being undermined by an old-school brother who couldn't adapt to change. Some of the articles included quotes from unnamed sources describing me as difficult to work with and resistant to new ideas. It was a clever strategy, and for a while, it seemed to be working. Several business journalists started viewing our situation through the lens of generational conflict rather than competence issues. But Lauren made a crucial mistake. She got too aggressive and too personal. When she started attacking my character rather than just my business philosophy, it looked petty and desperate. People in the industry began to see through the campaign. Her attempt to destroy my reputation actually backfired by making her look insecure and vindictive. That's when I played my strongest card. Over the months, I had been collecting internal memos, emails, and financial documents that showed the reality behind Lauren's leadership. I had correspondence proving she had misrepresented financial projections to the board. I had emails showing her dismissive attitude toward experienced employees. Most damaging of all, I had documents proving she had inflated revenue projections to justify her expansion plans, knowing the numbers were unrealistic. I carefully leaked these documents to the same journalists who had been writing positive pieces about her. The contrast between her public statements and private communications was devastating. One memo showed her telling the marketing team to spin the supplier situation as a positive cost-cutting move, when she knew it was actually creating serious operational problems. Another email chain revealed her calling board members easily manipulated and bragging about her ability to manage them with confidence and charm. When these documents hit the business press, the response was immediate and brutal. Lauren's credibility collapsed overnight. The same publications that had praised her vision now questioned her honesty and competence. Board members who had supported her started distancing themselves. The narrative had completely flipped, and Lauren had no one to blame but herself. The investor revolt began within days of the leaked documents being published. The major shareholders who had been quietly concerned about Lauren's leadership now had concrete evidence of her incompetence and dishonesty. Harrison Vale's words echoed in my mind as I watched the situation unfold. Sometimes the best revenge is letting someone destroy themselves. I didn't need to actively recruit investor support anymore. They were coming to me. Franklin Mutual, our largest institutional investor, requested a private meeting. Ezra, we made a mistake supporting the leadership change, their portfolio manager admitted. We trusted your father's judgment, but it's clear Lauren isn't ready for this responsibility. One by one, the major investors reached out to express similar concerns. They wanted to know if I would be willing to step back into leadership if the opportunity arose. I played it carefully, expressing reluctance while clearly showing I was open to serving the company's best interests. The mathematical reality was becoming clear. Lauren might own the largest single block of shares, but the majority of voting power belonged to investors who had lost confidence in her leadership. They were ready to support change, and they saw me as the obvious alternative. The explosive board meeting happened on a Tuesday morning in March. I had carefully coordinated with key investors to call for an emergency session to address the company's declining performance and leadership concerns. Lauren walked into that boardroom thinking she still had control, but the atmosphere was different immediately. Instead of the usual polite deference, there was tension and barely concealed frustration. I had prepared meticulously for this moment, bringing detailed financial analyses, client feedback reports, and competitive intelligence showing how much ground we had lost under Lauren's leadership. When I stood to address the board, my voice was calm and factual. Ladies and gentlemen, we need to discuss the elephant in the room. Nexus Industries is failing under current leadership. I presented the evidence methodically: lost clients, departed talent, supplier problems, missed financial targets, and damaged reputation. Each point was supported by documentation and data. Then I made the motion that would change everything. I call for a vote of no confidence in Ezra Trent as Chief Executive Officer. The silence in the room was deafening. Lauren's face went white as she realized what was happening. This wasn't just criticism. This was a coup. Lauren fought back with everything she had. When the vote was called, she stood up and delivered an emotional speech that I had to admit was impressive. She talked about vision, about family legacy, about the courage to make difficult changes. She painted herself as a reformer fighting against entrenched interests and suggested that removing her would be a step backward into the past. My brother represents the old way of doing business, she said, looking directly at me. He's afraid of change, afraid of innovation, afraid of letting go of control. Her voice cracked slightly as she continued. Our father chose me because he knew this company needed fresh leadership. Are you going to honor his wishes, or cave to pressure from someone who can't accept being passed over. It was a powerful performance, and for a moment, I worried it might work. Some board members looked uncomfortable, torn between the emotional appeal and the harsh financial realities. But then Franklin Mutual's representative spoke up. With respect, Lauren, your father made his decision based on incomplete information. We have to make ours based on results. The vote was closer than I had hoped, 7-5, but it was enough. Lauren was out. With Lauren removed as CEO, I could have simply stepped into the role and restored traditional leadership. But I had learned something important during this battle. Sometimes you need to think bigger. The company was wounded, its reputation damaged, and its competitive position weakened. We needed more than just new leadership. We needed a complete transformation. That's when I proposed the shocking move that no one saw coming: taking Nexus Industries public. Ladies and gentlemen, I announced to the stunned board, we're going to launch an initial public offering. The room erupted in discussion. Going public would bring in massive capital, allow us to expand aggressively, and create permanent value for shareholders. But it would also mean giving up family control forever, something that had never been considered in our company's history. I explained my reasoning carefully. The IPO would raise the funds needed to repair damage from Lauren's tenure, invest in new technology, and position us as a major player in the industry. More importantly, it would create accountability and transparency that would prevent future leadership disasters. Lauren, who had been sitting silently since her removal, suddenly found her voice. "You can't do this," she shouted. "This is our family's company." But the board was already intrigued by the possibilities. The legal maneuvering began immediately. While the board debated the IPO proposal, I worked with securities lawyers to prepare the necessary filings. Lauren, meanwhile, scrambled to find ways to stop the process. She hired her own legal team and began looking for injunctions, claiming that the board had exceeded its authority by removing her and that the IPO proposal was a violation of fiduciary duty. The legal battles were intense, but ultimately futile for Lauren. The board's action removing her as CEO was legally sound, and the IPO proposal was within normal corporate governance procedures. Her attempts to claim emotional distress and family business protections were rejected by the courts. The most satisfying moment came when her lawyers tried to argue that I had manipulated the situation unfairly. During depositions, all of my actions were revealed to be perfectly legal, aggressive, but completely within the bounds of corporate competition. I had used publicly available information, legitimate business relationships, and standard investment practices. Lauren's own emails and memos, the same ones that had destroyed her credibility with the board, now provided evidence that her failures were self-inflicted. By the time the legal smoke cleared, we had approval to proceed with the IPO, and Lauren had exhausted most of her financial resources on unsuccessful lawsuits. The media frenzy around our IPO was intense and overwhelmingly positive. Business journalists loved the story of corporate renewal and family drama. I became the narrative's hero, the experienced executive who had saved a family company from inexperienced leadership and positioned it for public market success. Profile pieces appeared in major business publications describing my 23 years of building the company and my strategic thinking in engineering the turnaround. Financial analysts praised the IPO as a smart move that would unlock value and provide growth capital. The company's roadshow presentations were oversubscribed, with institutional investors eager to buy shares in what they saw as a classic American business success story. Lauren, meanwhile, became a cautionary tale about nepotism and the importance of merit-based leadership. Business schools started using our case as an example of how family dynamics can destroy corporate value. The contrast in our public images was stark. I was the seasoned professional who had saved the company, while she was the inexperienced relative who had nearly destroyed it. The IPO pricing came in at the high end of projections, validating everything I had argued about the company's potential under proper leadership. The day I rang the opening bell at the New York Stock Exchange was the culmination of everything I had worked toward. Standing on that platform, looking out at the trading floor, I felt a satisfaction that was impossible to describe. This wasn't just about defeating Lauren or reclaiming my position. This was about proving that merit and experience matter more than family politics or inheritance. The stock opened strong and climbed throughout the day, creating instant wealth for early investors and validating the board's decision to support the IPO. I gave interviews to financial media explaining our growth strategy and expansion plans. Every question about the leadership change was handled professionally, focusing on the company's future rather than dwelling on past conflicts. Lauren was notably absent from all IPO events. She had been invited as a courtesy, since she still owned a small percentage of shares, but she declined to participate. Later, I heard from mutual acquaintances that she had watched the coverage from her apartment, crying as she saw the company she thought she owned being celebrated without her. The symbolism was perfect. I was literally ringing in a new era while she remained stuck in the past, consumed by bitterness about opportunities she had lost through her own mistakes. With the company now publicly traded and flush with capital, I began the restructuring process I had planned for months. The first priority was rebuilding the management team with experienced professionals who shared my vision for growth and operational excellence. I created new divisions focused on emerging technologies and international expansion. The organizational chart was completely redesigned to eliminate redundancies and improve efficiency. Lauren's name disappeared from all corporate materials as her remaining titles and responsibilities were eliminated. She retained her small shareholding, but she had no operational role and no decision-making authority. I established clear performance metrics and accountability systems to ensure that the mistakes of her tenure could never be repeated. The changes were dramatic and immediate. Client confidence returned as they saw familiar faces in leadership positions and experienced the improved service quality that came with proper management. Supplier relationships were repaired through personal attention and fair dealing. Employee morale improved dramatically as people saw that merit and performance were once again valued over politics and favoritism. Within 6 months, the company's financial performance exceeded even our optimistic projections. The stock price continued climbing, making early investors very wealthy and validating every decision I had made. That's when Lauren showed up at my office, unannounced and desperate. My assistant tried to turn her away, but I told her to let Lauren in. I was curious to see what she wanted after everything that had happened. She looked terrible, thin, tired, and clearly struggling financially. The designer clothes and perfect makeup were gone, replaced by off-the-rack business attire and the hollow look of someone who had lost everything. "Ezra," she began, her voice shaking, "I need to talk to you." She sat down across from my desk, in the same chair where she had once announced her plans to sideline me. The irony wasn't lost on either of us. "I made mistakes," she continued, the words clearly difficult for her to say. "I was inexperienced and overconfident. I should have listened to you, should have learned from you instead of trying to replace you." She paused, taking a deep breath before making her request. "I'm asking you to give me another chance. A position in the company, any position. I'll work my way back up. I'll prove myself." It was a complete reversal from the arrogant woman who had humiliated me in front of the board just months earlier. She was begging for the opportunity to rejoin the company she had once controlled. I listened to Lauren's entire plea without interrupting. When she finished, I leaned back in my chair and considered her request carefully. The old Ezra might have felt sympathy for his little sister, might have offered forgiveness and a path back into the family business. But the man sitting in that CEO chair had learned important lessons about loyalty, competence, and consequences. "Lauren," I said finally, my voice calm and professional, "I appreciate your honesty about the mistakes you made. I really do. And because we're family, I'm willing to offer you something." Her face lit up with hope, probably expecting a management position or at least a senior role. "I have an opening in our customer service department. Entry level, minimum wage. You'd be answering phones and processing orders." The hope in her eyes died immediately, replaced by shock and humiliation. "You can't be serious," she whispered. "I have an MBA. I ran this company." I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city skyline. "You ran this company into the ground. Now you have 2 choices. Take the job I'm offering or leave. Either way, this conversation is over." I didn't turn around to watch her leave, but I heard her footsteps retreating and the door closing softly behind her. Sometimes the best revenge isn't dramatic or explosive. Sometimes it's just giving someone exactly what they deserve. What did you think of Ezra's ultimate revenge? Have you ever dealt with family betrayal in business or seen someone get the perfect comeuppance they deserved? Smash that like button and subscribe for more incredible tales of corporate drama, family feuds, and sweet, sweet revenge. Share your own experiences in the comments below. I love hearing your stories.